Coming up on UGTV. A special session of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas.
To order. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. Anyone who is watching at home, I'd ask the clerk to announce the meeting and call roll, please.
A special session is being held on Thursday, March 28th, 2019 at 5:00 p.m. in the 5th floor conference room for a presentation on the small box variety stores, followed by the 2020 census. Roll call. Mugia.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Kane.
Here.
Markley. Walters.
Here.
Philbrook.
Here.
Bynum.
Here.
Burrows.
Here.
Townsend. McKiernan.
Here.
Alvey.
Here. So again, as you said, we'll have two presentations. The first is a presentation on small box variety stores. And our second presentation will be the progress on the complete count on the 2020 census. So this time I'll turn it over to Administrator Bach to introduce staff.
Thank you, Mayor. As noted, our first item is on the small box variety stores. This is an issue that came up in our community when we were looking at the numbers of smaller box variety stores that were coming into the community and was having some impact on the ability, or at least what we thought of the impact of the ability of some grocery opportunities to come into the store where they could provide different types of fresh food varieties for our residents. By them eating up part of the market with this. So that's where we started looking at what are our options in evaluating this and looking at some comparables done in other communities. So tonight, while we had moved forward on some action, tonight we want to come back to you and show you some of the work we've done in looking at other areas and then talk about it. And as this healthy initiative has been a prominent point for us in looking at for some time, that's why it's really a key factor to discuss. So I'm going to turn this over to Patrick Waters from our legal department, who's done some research on this, and he'll present from here. Patrick.
Thank you, Mayor Alvey, Commissioners, Mr. Bach. So last month, the Commission requested a special session, and the 4 reasons that were given were first, wanting to know more information about how many of these stores were in the Kansas City metro area. Second, are any other metro cities regulating them? If so, how? Third, how are other cities doing to incentivize healthy food options? And fourth, to discuss other issues pertaining to these small box stores. Based on our research, we've determined that there are approximately 26 small box variety stores in KCK, about 49 in KC-Mo. As a comparison, Overland Park 10, Olathe 3. I will tell you that this is only an estimate. I believe it probably undercounts the number. Did our best to look at business licensing data and mapping data, but I don't represent that this is a complete count. We could have missed some. Here's a map showing the locations that we have in Kansas City, Kansas, that we were able to determine stores that most likely fall under this definition. And as you can see, mostly concentrated in central, northeast, and the south. We did not find any out in the Piper area. So the question was asked about regulations in other cities. The only city in the Kansas City metro area that has a similar regulation is Roland Park. They have a 5,000-foot separation requirement. Their reasoning was based more on concern about the effect on property values rather than as a healthy food initiative. Those were the reasons that they gave. Outside of the KC metro area, you have Tulsa, Oklahoma. They established a healthy neighborhood overlay district, and within that district, there's a separation requirement of 1 mile. However, there is a way that stores can exempt themselves if they provide at least 500 square feet of space to fresh foods. They also encourage full-service grocery stores by reducing their parking ratios to make it easier for them to open. In Mesquite, Texas, they also have a 5,000 square foot separation requirement. And then in New Orleans, there is a 1 mile separation in what they deem the conservation district, and 2 miles in the rest of the city. Similar to our ordinance, they have a way that stores can exempt themselves by dedicating at least 15% of their shelf space to fresh or fresh frozen food. The question was asked, what are other cities doing to incentivize healthy food options? A lot of these options came from the study that's shown on the left there by the Public Health Law Center that was done a few years ago. I'll just go through a few of those. One of a very popular initiative for corner stores is when the governments and nonprofits team up to provide grants to these small corner stores. And what they typically do is they provide grants that allow them to buy refrigeration and freezer units and other supplies that would make it easier for these small stores to provide the kind of fresh food that their residents are looking for. So you have a lot of what they call corner store projects around the country, and these are just a few examples of those. In Kansas, one example that was given was in Allen County, Kansas. They ranked pretty low on the county health index. They have a large number of farms, but only about 1% of their crops actually stay in the county. Most go to large commercial feedlots and other places. So they developed what's called the Allen County Grow Program, which sought to increase access to affordable, nutritious, and safe food. They promote a lot of local events, farmers markets, and other types of events like that. In Junction City, they amended their zoning code to allow farmers markets in their residential zones so that it was easier for their residents to access those markets. Douglas County has an interesting program where they allow people to rent out a commercial kitchen on their fairgrounds. This allows, it can just be as simple as friends and families meeting up to cook a large meal, or if people are entrepreneurs and want to open up their own food business, they can test out their recipes by using a commercial quality kitchen. Mays County, the example was given about teaching students to learn cooking skills and teaching about food production. In the metro area, we had a recent study called by the Kansas City Grocery Task Force. Here's a copy of the cover, and there's a link in the at the end of the report of my PowerPoint. Some of the recommendations were to centralize information regarding the financial incentives that are available to grocery store developers, partnering with charitable foundations in the financial sector to invest in healthy food options, working to make sure that residents have transportation options for those who don't have cars so that they can actually get to the grocery store and get there in a decent amount of time, because having perishable foods is very difficult when you're having to take a long bus ride and cold foods are melting. Investigating new and emerging food delivery models. I think that the mobile food grocer would be an example of a new type of food delivery model. And then just generally promoting healthy food education. At the Unified Government, here are some of the initiatives that we've worked on in the last few years. We too have modified our zoning code to allow for mobile grocers in residential areas. We've allowed people to plant community gardens on Unified Government-owned lots. We've provided space for the farmers market downtown here. The H2O to Grow program, which has installed water taps for community gardens and urban farms. Of course, building and investing in a new downtown grocery store. Through the Northeast Master Plan, we've identified that a Northeast grocer is a key component of that master plan process and provided a small startup stipend through that process. And partnering with local organizations to commission the KCK Healthy Food Assessment a couple of years ago. Here's a picture of that, and again, the link is in the PowerPoint. Some of the recommendations that they had that are relevant to the discussion tonight were increasing the availability of healthy food choices, avoiding concentrations of unhealthy food, and creating public incentives and tax credits for healthy food. And of course, all of our traditional economic development tools are available to incentivize grocery store developments. Here's a list of some of the different economic development incentives that grocery stores have used. TIF districts, CIDs, transportation development districts, and the NRA program. One of the big issues that we have in KCK are a high number of tracts that are known as food deserts. Technically, the government calls these low income, low access tracts, and they define that as a tract with at least 500 people or a third of the population living more than 1 mile from the nearest supermarket, supercenter, or large grocery store. Oh, let's see. Okay, here is a map of the tracts that the USDA has deemed to be low income, low access. This was as of 2015, and so we noted several grocery stores that either have developed since then or weren't counted in that study that would likely take off a couple of tracts, and then the yellow is the Merck, which would probably, again, take at least one of those tracts out. But even if you take into account the stores that weren't in that 2015 study, you still have a large number of census tracts that qualified as a food desert.
The other thing I would note on that is all those stores use public financing and public incentives to build them. Perhaps not the one in Johnson County there at 47th and Mission.
That's the neighborhood.
That's the Walmart neighborhood market across from Joe's KC.
Yeah.
But the Walmart neighborhood grocer in Argentine, the Merck, and the Price Chopper that are represented on this map are all heavily incentivized.
So that gets us back to the issue about whether or how to regulate these variety stores. We had originally previously deemed them dollar stores, and this was the previous ordinance that we had. As we discussed last month, we discovered that through a drafting error that this ordinance had been overridden by another ordinance, and so we took about looking at whether or not we can make some changes to improve upon the ordinance. And the proposed ordinance here, the main change is from the last time is that we define the variety store not just by what it is, but by what it is not. And we provide these stores a way to exempt themselves out of the regulation. Number one, by dedicating at least 15% of their shelf space to fresh frozen food. The reason number two is in there is because if there's a business that has a variety of products, but they really only have a Coke machine, a candy counter, they're obviously not really in the food business, and we're not concerned about the impact that would have on in providing in discouraging the growth of grocery stores in the area. And then, again, there haven't been any studies that have indicated that pharmacies or gas stations discourage the growth of grocery stores. And so even though some of those sell a variety of products, we provided exemptions for those. The variety stores would be allowed generally in commercial and industrial districts. And again, we've kept the 10,000 foot separation requirement a little bit less than 2 miles. Last thing I'd say is, that, these variety stores and fresh food are not incompatible. Dollar General itself has indicated that they are experimenting with an expanded concept in which they would bring more fresh food and produce into their stores. However, only about 425 of their 15,000 stores currently have those. But again, their CEO has indicated that they find that providing fresh food and produce has been a positive for these stores and is a way to generate increased traffic. So it's something that these types of stores can do and can do successfully. It's really just a question of which communities are going to see the benefits of these types of stores. And so the proposed ordinance that we have would make sure that when new stores or remodeled stores are introduced into our community, if they wanted to be within 10,000 feet of an existing store, that they would introduce this new type of concept and have at least 15% fresh food. And then I just have links to the different studies and sites that were mentioned.
Commissioner Philbrook?
Okay, so, you've mentioned the 3 big stores, but what about the 2 Save-A-Lots and the Aldis? They don't count as grocery stores?
So when I was looking at those this afternoon and looking at that map, so the Aldi at 48th and State was there when they did that. And so I've been wondering myself why they didn't count the Aldi in that. And
The Save-A-Lot's been downtown at 29th for a while.
right.
As well as something similar to that at 82nd State, so.
And so if you go back to the map, Patrick, I think that
Yeah, I think
the Save-A-Lot would probably, well, let's start with Aldi. So that's the biggest green box there if you see where 635 and I-70 come together.
I know, it's mine.
Right. So that would be, that district this would take out part of that district, and it may be that district is so big that you've got to have it within if you have more than 500 people a mile away.
Yeah.
So that district might be so big that the Aldi didn't cover enough of it and it got included. And then it could be the same for the Save-A-Lot, because if you look, see, the Save-A-Lot is just northwest of the K in Kansas City. And so if you draw a mile arc around that, it's going to take it might take half of that next green box above Kansas, but it may not take enough to eliminate that tract from having 500 people that meet the criteria of a food desert in that tract. And so I think that's why those aren't, I think that those were probably counted, but that's why they aren't showing up, is the tracts just had enough people far enough away that it still met their criteria.
Well, I had to ask that question because
Right.
when people look at this and listen to this, they're going, what about these other stores, because they frequent them a lot.
Right.
And they're going, what is the deal?
Well, I had that question as well, and that's what I think happened with those, because they obviously, Aldi and Save-A-Lot have a tremendous selection of fresh food and vegetables and fruits and meats and things in there. So
And they both have upped their game as far as quality and
Right.
presentation, and the places are clean. So
Right.
okay. Now, Sunset Plaza, there's like a Dollar General and a Family Dollar within, I don't know, a few hundred feet of each other. And if one of them gets ready to remodel, whoever comes first, they're under the gun. Is that it?
No. I just mentioned remodeling in the sense that, as Dollar General, just to take that for an example, they've indicated that they're going to be remodeling 200 stores this year into the expanded fresh food concept. So it is a concept that they're looking at. The ordinance would only apply to new developments.
But if it was so if you went into an old strip mall and remodeled an old space to a new small box variety store, it would apply. That's where the remodel.
That it would or wouldn't?
If it was so if it hadn't been a small box variety store before and they remodeled that space into one, then it would apply. But if an existing small box variety store wanted to do their own remodeling, the ordinance wouldn't have any impact on that.
Okay. That's my questions for right now.
Commissioner Makia?
So I want to talk about the same slide that Commissioner Philbrook wants to talk about. I'm not sure I quite understand. So you have the Walmart in Argentine, for example, And then the Save-A-Lot that sits right in the green area of 18th Street Expressway. Tell me again, I didn't understand that. Why does that not address?
So I think that track should be eliminated. What we are putting those stars to indicate that this study was not perfect and didn't take into account some of the stores. And so,
well, they weren't there in this is a 2015 study, and those stores were just either coming online right before or right after the study.
yeah.
If I remember correctly.
2013.
So, I mean, I don't know why that wouldn't have been there, because when you draw so the big circle to the south and to the east, there may be enough people in there, like that tract is bigger because the mile arc cuts off about a third of that. And so there might be enough people in that tract still meets the definition. The tract to the west should not, if they counted that Walmart neighborhood market, would not have been counted in that. So we've made I think we really put this up here to show we've made, and we're making improvements, but it's with incentivized stores where, you know, we think that parts of these other, when the MERT goes in, I think that the 3 tracks above it and the one to the west will then disappear because of the save. I think we'll eliminate some of those from the food desert with that. There was already a price chopper where the new one went in, so that didn't really change that except by a few hundred feet. And then I just think that the neighborhood market and the Save-A-Lot to the south, the one tract was too big, and I think that there's an error on the other one, because the way I looked at it today, that tract would go away. So we just want to show that we're making progress with this slide, and note that the study wasn't perfect, but we are making progress, but there's still obviously still work to do.
So when you determine like accessibility in a food desert, I think you said earlier on in your presentation, you look at walkability and bus transportation in order to get to and from. Well, not only the track to the west of the market and the Save-A-Lot that covers the east, what Argentine does have is a regular bus route that's been in place for a long time that runs right along Metropolitan. That was one of the factors that was considered when we chose that location, is it was centrally located and there was a bus route, and that bus route even extends up to the top area of this side of 635, because as you can see, it's white, but that's where Douglas Heights is. But all of those people in that green area on the west side of the Star, until you get into Turner, have a bus route right in front of their main thoroughfare.
Right, but they still have to get to the main thoroughfare. And so the study doesn't say that just because you have bus access to it, that it's okay. It says that when you have a food desert, one of the things you should do is improve the transportation there until you can get a store located there. So the bus service is great. It's a plus, but it doesn't necessarily eliminate the food desert. It's a way to help those people before you get the cure of a real grocery store there for them.
Okay, so I'll just leave it this. Obviously, I spent a lot of time on both of these grocery stores personally, and I would tell you, as a person that lives in that neighborhood, I can walk from my house safely now from 25th Street on sidewalk to the Walmart, to the Save-A-Lot, and I can walk to 12th Street. And I can do that without any ice cream melting. So I don't understand how.
Well, and that's all within a mile of those stores, and that's what the food desert says. If you're within a mile, you could do that walk.
That's a mile. I know that because not only do I walk it, I bike it.
Mm-hmm.
So I can tell you that from 12th Street to 18th Street is not a mile.
No, but it goes beyond that. It's within that mile. I think that what's going on in Argentina is great, and I think it solved the problem. The map just doesn't reflect what the real benefits are there yet. But you're right. We have solved the problem in most of those areas, and the mile radius goes up to about just past the BPU water facility that's east of 18th Street.
Yeah, that might be a different situation, but the whole lower tier definitely has bus access. They have
absolutely
main thoroughfare access, and it's walkable, very walkable.
And I think that we meant to show this as a good thing. And I'm sorry it's not looking that way, but we do think that Argentine area was, the food desert was solved there in that part of your district from the stores being built there. It was great.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Kane?
Okay, well, it shows where you guys only found 10 in Overland Park. I think my request was to go all over Johnson County and look, because there's a hell of a lot more than 10. And they're in Leawood, they're everywhere. You know, so we can't kid ourselves about they're not just here in Wyandotte County. And they're utilized. And my wife specifically goes to the one out there on 78th Street, the 5 and below or whatever. But in our original ordinance, we called out dollar store. Now, maybe we should have said small box. Maybe we should have said something else, but if I'm Dollar General or any of these other people mentioned in this deal right here, do they have a lawsuit against us because we've already mentioned them? Crickets.
Well, I don't think so, but that's one thing we took into account. That was a concern that they voiced when they wrote to us. And so we took that into account and said, well, the language, you know, we can make it broader and it should be broader. And so that's what we did and made sure that, you know, we weren't calling out specific, you know, companies. We were calling out a store format. And so that's what the new.
I'm not an academician, but you got it right here, brother. You got Dollar Store, you got Dollar General, you got Dollar Tree, you got 99-cent deals, Five Below dimes, and other 5 and dime stores. We have specifically called these people out. And if I'm an owner of one of these, I'm going to be pretty upset. And yeah, I know we want to correct it by saying the new ordinance is small box. But in reality, this is what we mean. I have some serious concerns about what we did in the past and how do we correct the issue. And is there a potential lawsuit if we vote on this? And you know, we got an hour and a half. I'd sure like to have somebody bone me up on whether we can get sued or not in the next hour and a half before I go downstairs and vote on something.
Well, Commissioner, there's always a chance of a lawsuit, but there was always a chance of a lawsuit before. I think, quite frankly, this correction minimizes the chance of a lawsuit because now we are specifically taking away those named stores and making it a broad category of stores, which could be much broader than just the names of the stores that you mentioned. So I think this probably reduces our chance of a lawsuit by adopting this ordinance.
Well, here's something else. We're getting this at 5 o'clock today. We have people watching us on TV right now. And I guarantee you my phone's going to blow up before I go downstairs. It frustrates me a little bit that we get something like this. We don't really have time for it to soak in. And we're going downstairs at 7 o'clock and vote. And I like to hear from my constituents because it's them that we represent.
You guys tabled this for a month, so we had to put it back on the agenda. I think part of the discussion was that, you know, we'd have the special session, discuss it. You may wish to table it again. So there's nothing that requires it to be heard tonight. We just had to put it on because you tabled it for 30 days.
And that's a good answer.
That was my fault.
You know, I want time for this to soak in. I mean, this is a big deal. And I know in some areas they don't want it. I know some areas do. But I don't want to disappoint our constituents by running in, you know, half-cocked or half on fire or half off fire and make a decision that's going to rattle the people, because the people contact us and say we either disapprove or approve, and I'm pretty consistent with voting with my constituents, and I want to continue to maintain that consistency.
Rob, when you look, actually, go back to the map. I know, you know, there's some adjustments made to that map, but actually, if the MRC is built, which we anticipate it will be, that will not change it. It will not take that area out of the food desert, because a food desert is an area that is not served by a supermarket or a store. I think of at least 30,000 square feet. I mean, the definition that they use to determine a food desert will not be resolved by the MERC.
Well, I think that
Slide.
Again, the definition of a food desert that is used nationally is that it has to be a supermarket or a large retail grocer, I think of 30,000 square feet or more.
I don't know about the 30,000 square feet, but if you look at the other areas that are out of the food desert, they have to be counting something less than that, because I guess part of this area was out because the price chopper might have still been there at that point in time, but I think for our purposes, these 3 census tracts are going to be served by a full-service grocery store that has the foods and the quality of food that they want. They will have affordable foods. They are on the transit line, and I think for our purposes, we consider this winning for this area.
And I'd agree with that. I really do. I just want to be clear that if you look at what the definition is normally accepted nationwide for a food desert, it is an area that is not served within 1 mile or with, accessible by transit. 30,000, and we can use the magic of Google and check that, but I'm pretty sure that's the definition. So I just want to say that. I believe it's an improvement. Obviously, the pop-up that they're trying to work, the co-op they're trying to work on Quindaro are all good moves. I'm much more concerned and interested in how we incentivize more grocers, and rather than try to prevent a viable business model, a successful business, from determining where their market is and where they ought to build. So that's my concern. I'm just fundamentally opposed to try to control the market in that way. If we were talking about alcohol or cigarettes, that to me is a different matter. I think we're going to end up regulating vape because the nicotine in those are 18 times more addictive than the nicotine in cigarettes. And I know as soon as there's continuing movement towards legalization of marijuana, we're not going to be eliminating them from coming in. So I have some real concerns about this. I understand the concern that dollar stores, based upon the small box variety stores, based upon the product they carry, can soak the margin out of grocery stores. I worked in a Safeway store when they were still around, when they were marking up spices 400% so they could sell flour below cost. You knew where their profit margins were. So I understand that, but if they're in competition with one another, they're in competition with Walmart, we're not regulating convenience stores. We're not regulating the location of fast food franchises. So it seems to me if what is driving this policy is controlling the access to poor diet, then it's much bigger than small box variety stores. Commissioner Bynum.
Thank you. Mayor, the USDA definition online does not include the 30,000 square feet definition. However, some other national entity may. That was the one I clicked on. Couple questions for Rob, maybe. The new proposed ordinance on the variety stores, on the 15,000 square foot, on Minnesota Avenue, we've got a number of what I might consider a store of this type that aren't a corporate owned chain. They're individually owned stores that I think probably come under the 15,000 square foot. I just wonder if we'd be hurting some of our own local retailers with this proposed ordinance? I don't know that. I just curious.
So it won't impact anybody that's already there. And so if you think about Chips and Coins, they have some fresh foods in there. Obviously, they have kind of a restaurant where they prepare fresh food. So, and they want to expand to have more fresh foods. So I think that they would probably be okay.
Okay.
Some of the other stores have a lot of variety goods, but not more than 2% of shelf space to food. And so they would not be involved in this. And so I think that it really, when folks come in and we have to get a better description of what their business is and help guide them through this to what they could do to meet the terms of the ordinance, if we have new local people that want to do that. But one of the things when we were looking at the map, it was hard to figure out from somebody's web page without going in the store and looking around, would they meet this or not meet that? Because they are a small box variety store, and it's kind of hard to tell from the pictures on the internet or the description of their store. So I think with the exceptions here, we could guide folks to be able to work within that code. And I think that, I think the real important thing here is the legislative intent about what you want to do. You want, and what your goal is with this. And as we've expressed, through the staff report, it would be to provide healthy food for small box variety stores, not calling out anybody, and giving everybody a chance to open a store of that size and meet the criteria that we have here so that most folks could fit into that.
But just a couple more questions. The next slide talks about the districts a new ordinance would be allowed in. So that was not delineated in the original ordinance, is that correct? And now it is?
It was.
It was.
Patrick indicates that it was, but those are the districts that they would be allowed in anyway within the ordinance.
Okay, and then I'm perfectly satisfied with a 30-day delay. Also willing, if the commission is of the appetite now that we really don't want to regulate the stores with an ordinance, then it seems like we'd be looking at a repeal of an existing ordinance.
No, there's no ordinance.
There's no ordinance to repeal.
Yeah.
That's
Yes, Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. When I look at these numbers, on page number 2, I guess it's slide number 3, and look at the numbers approximately, it appears to me that there are a higher number of these stores per square mile in Wyandotte County than there are in other parts of the city. Maybe Kansas City, Missouri, that may or may not be true. I haven't had a chance to kind of look at that, but I'm just kind of looking at where the stores are situated in Wyandotte County, and we have quite a bit of these stores. Looks like 12 on the east side, at least 12 on the west, on the east side of 635, and at least 12 on the west side of 635. For me personally, I don't have to ask my constituency about these types of stores. They've already told me. They told me we need a traditional grocery store, and that's our first. That should be your first priority, Commissioner Johnson. When we look at these stores, for me, and I liken these types of stores, however you want to categorize them, in the same way that I look at check cashing stores or payday loan stores, because they target areas that are low income and more times than not are primarily minority content in terms of the people that live in those communities. They essentially fill a gap that the traditional model has neglected. And so for me, it's however we phrase repeal or don't repeal, I'm sticking by the words I said the first time. I think we've got enough east of 635. And I want to continue to say that because my constituency continues to say that. These stores take away, it makes it harder, in my opinion, to bring in a traditional grocery store when we're not controlling the number of these small box variety stores. So for me, it's not either or, it's both and. So as we continue to struggle to bring in a traditional grocer model into the urban core, particularly the Northeast, I want to make sure that we're doing all that we can to give the ones that might have an interest in coming in, I'm talking about traditional grocery stores, a fair chance by not oversaturating well, it's already oversaturated as far as I'm concerned. But I certainly want to be very mindful about how we manage both of those types of stores as we struggle to try to bring in a more traditional model into the urban core. Now, I will say, I think that as we look at the traditional grocery store model, the smaller store in terms of, for me, less than 30,000 square foot is probably what will work best in the urban core versus a 35 or 40,000 square foot store. But I think we need to be very strategic about how we do this, because what my constituents want is a traditional grocer in the Northeast, and they don't understand why in the world they can't get one. Well, you know, we know the numbers and we understand the figures and all the things that go into these business decisions, but when I sit down and try to tell them that, they're saying we still want a traditional grocer in Northeast.
Thank you. Yes.
So I had looked at, pulled up on the internet a couple of those locations where you talked about them having similar instructions and or ordinances around dollar stores. I'm going to call them what we've been calling them. And it looked to me as if they picked certain areas only, not the whole city, but they hammered out areas that they were trying to redevelop, and like the one in New Orleans, where they were trying to redevelop an area, they were trying to build it back up, and so they wanted to limit the number of those type of small box stores so they could get local businesses and the things that the people wanted in that area. And I wonder, in my mind, is that really more what we're wanting to do, is start in an area, see how that works, see if that really does anything, and then, expand? I'm just asking legally, but,
right. Yeah, I mean, that is a zoning tool. Like you gave the example, Tulsa, they created an overlay district, and this only applies within that overlay district. I think it's probably, the downtown area. And so that is an option under the zoning code to create a defined district wherein these parameters would apply.
Commissioner Burrows.
Thank you. We're trying to put an ordinance in place that I think stops people from investing in our community. We're not putting out what I would call a welcome mat. We're providing an obstacle and not creating an opportunity. If we're going to put some kind of ordinance in place that states a certain partner of ours has to meet certain criteria before they're even considered, we're sending the wrong message. We can be helpful in stating, if you want to come here, we need to engage in neighborhood groups and see their demographic study. It's kind of like the census tract that we just visited about. But competition drives a good market. And we've got the work coming online. I think this commission is going to learn a tremendous, valuable lesson from the investment we're making in the work with a not-for-profit organization. And part of the study talks about that. These variety box stores provide jobs. They provide goods to a blighted area in need of either a food desert, hardware, access to just goods all around. And we have so long in our areas of our community been void of those. So we should be engaging our neighborhood groups that we've charged with bringing their voice forward. So if a certain segment of the community doesn't want it, we hear their message. We tell the vendor that you're not welcome there, but maybe another part of the community would welcome you. But not to engage a community, for us to just flat out put an ordinance against something, I think we're taking the bad road to do so. And So let me see if I do need to understand, if we have a grocery store, that we have $2 stores within 2 miles, and we put a grocery store right in the middle of them, and we want to put are we then banning any other dollar stores, variety store, 99-cent stores, the old TG&Y, the old dime stores that we used to have in this community? Are we banning them from being able to build within that 2-mile radius, even though we have a grocery store, full-service grocery store?
Under the option we have here, yes. There's one thing that we did discuss, whether or not to provide an exception if the new variety store was within a certain amount of feet from a full-service grocery store. You know, that could be another exception to add if you felt like, you know, as long as it was close to a full-service grocery store, that could be, you know, an exception to look at. But under the draft language now, it is a 2-mile or 10,000-foot distance.
So basically what we're doing is defeating an opportunity. We're creating a public subsidy. This community has a history of giving incentives to big market organizations. We had a list of them earlier, that we give tax abatements, CIDs, TDDs, and other things to the large organizations that want to come into our community. And we're banning a smaller business prototype from coming into our community that will be building their own building, paying property tax, and providing jobs in our community, probably to a local neighborhood organization or somebody. That model just doesn't set well with me.
Commissioner, they are eligible for NRA, so they could get the 10-year stair-step tax abatement on all of those buildings because they're less than $3 million. And not all of them have, but a couple have.
Yeah. Understood. I would just say that it wouldn't be as large of a incentive for them to build. We don't make it competitive enough for our small stores. We have these stores we could go in and say, you know, if you move that shelf out and put these little, bring in your McDonald's pre-wrapped burgers or whatever you want to call them, breakfast biscuits, and put it on your shelves. Now you're serving fresh food. You can go into a convenience store. As long as they're selling tobacco and alcohol, it's okay to have these stores. But somebody that doesn't want to sell tobacco or gasoline, we're putting a limit on what they can do with these variety stores. That's how I read this ordinance. And if I'm wrong, please let me know. But it was just mentioned we don't, the convenience stores, some of them do the very same thing except they sell gas and tobacco. I would just like to see us have more discussion and look at how we can be more proactive in encouraging these businesses to maybe up their game and still meet the needs of the community when we're still struggling to bring in a grocery store.
I think what we looked at was that, so there's been a proliferation of these stores. There's been many of them built in the last few years. And a couple of our grocery stores were then not maintaining themselves very well. The Price Chopper at 47th and State was dirty. I wouldn't shop in there. I did when I first moved here for about 3 months, and then I just couldn't go in there anymore because of the quality of the food and how dirty it was and what it smelled like in there, and having to return food. And I think if you think that there might be a correlation there, and you look at, we're putting $6 million into the mark, the money that we put into the projects in Argentine and at 78th and State, and you look what the cost benefit difference is, if there's any relationship at all there, I think it is probably worth more discussion to see how much money we're having to spend to get fresh food in our community versus the benefit of the rest of this.
So I'm going to speak to that issue of a clean store, and that simply comes down to the manager. The manager has to have pride in his or her own store to make sure that the floors are swept, the trash is picked up. Again, I know because I worked in a grocery store, and that was one of the things I loved doing, was going around cleaning up. But
rancid chicken and rancid Ben and Jerry's ice cream are not.
Yeah.
Just
and I think, Rob, you implied what the solution was. The solution, the reason you stopped going there is because it became dirty. Mm-hmm. If the owner had decided we really need to compete, I know people that would stop going. People in my neighborhood would drive right past the Apple Market there at 47th and Shawnee Drive to drive to the hen house. They got tired of it being dirty. These elderly folks would rather had shop in their neighborhood than drive to Merriam to shop, but they did it because it was a clean store. So if you're going to compete as a grocer, you need to make a good appearance. And I think the same thing goes for the dollar stores. I've been in some dollar stores which are very well kept. I've been in some that are dogs. But I could say the same thing about fast food franchises or restaurants. You know, there are certain places you go and you say, well, this person really cares and pride, I'm going to come back. I keep coming back to, instead of trying to force them into becoming a grocer, incentivize them to do this. We need to come up with incentives for these groups to add the fresh produce piece. That maybe there's an economic incentive to have them do that rather than punish them out because they're not conforming to what we need. Commissioner McGeeh.
Thank you, Mayor. So I agree with a lot of your comments, Mayor. I just had a question for Commissioner Johnson, specifically because you're talking about your constituency. And I know what that's like, because in Wyandotte County, your constituency and my constituency isn't necessarily like the constituency that's west of 635 or west of 435. So I hear what you're saying. But I would be concerned if there was no plans on the table for a grocery store, a full-service grocery store in that area, in the Northeast area. But don't you think that with our plans, and I haven't heard anyone objecting to move forward with the Merck grocery store, don't you think that the fair market will take over and those kinds of dollar stores are not going to want to locate where they have such competition in the Merck, especially since you're familiar with your constituency and you know that that's where they're going to shop. In fact, I'd be more worried about the ones that are there going out of business as a result of the Merck coming in if the demand for a full-service grocery store is really there. And since the business community, before they just don't say, oh, we're going to put a Dollar General here. They don't do that. They do a market study, and usually they become familiar with the county, and they know kind of what the county plans are. So first of all, I would think that the Merck will take care of that problem all by itself if the demand truly is for a full-service grocery store. Then in regard to the mayor's comments, and I think a couple of others about the store being dirty. So I was here when this issue initially came up, which was years ago, when the recession hit and the number of dollar stores, Dollar Trees popped up all across the country, not exclusively to Wyandotte County. My concern at that time was not health related. I think Commissioner McKiernan has said over and over again that the #1 factor for obesity and health issues is poverty. Yet people like to blame a variety of retailers, which is not the actual factual evidence. And KU Medical Center has done a lot of research on that for me. So I am sure that these places are not causing health issues. What needs to happen, though, is there needs to be more healthy choices. We're addressing that issue in the Northeast. Why this issue initially came up is because as these stores, dollar stores, were being dropped in our neighborhoods, it was truly the maintenance of them. And my concern at that time was not even so much the inside of the store. The customer gets to decide the quality of store you want to shop inside. But on the outside of the door, things like dumpster doors were broken, trash was falling out, trash receptacles were not being emptied. So I, as commissioner, was able to reach out specifically to Dollar General and develop a relationship with them. And they have changed their maintenance program substantially and are much more aware and much more conscious of the condition, at least of the outside of their stores. So what started off as me being unhappy with the condition of the Dollar General in Argentine and the Dollar General off 635 in, I would say, Turner, because it's on that side. They have drastically changed their mowing. Their mowing is better, their trash cleanup is better, their trash collection is better. So I think we address that issue directly with the corporation. And the last thing I'll say is, That's not, to me, that goes to what my biggest concern in this county is. That's a code issue. That doesn't have anything to do with the kind of store that it is. So I just want you to hear me. I'm on your side. I want to see your district, I am really. I want to see your district have access to healthy food. I've seen a massive change in my district. There was a drop in sales at Dollar General as a result of the Save-A-Lot and the Walmart being built. I can't imagine Dollar General coming in and building another one, or any dollar place building another one, because there's too much competition. And the beautiful part is it's the competition our constituency wants. So I hope that's helpful.
Commissioner Kane?
Commissioner Johnson, I have ran into your constituents and they don't like them, period. And to be perfectly honest about it, some of them aren't excited about the Merck. That they really want something at 10th and Parallel or 18th and Parallel or somewhere where they feel it is on the north side. And that issue has been an issue. I've been here 14 years. Nathan fought it, you know, and it's something that we need to get done. You know, and it's important to all the community. I mean, it's very handy for me, or I don't go to the grocery store, my wife does. But she runs out to Bonner to go to the grocery store because she doesn't like the one out there at 110th at Walmart. You know, and we want a grocery store out there, but I definitely need one in your area more than most.
Can I say this, Mayor? I think what you're both saying, I understand that. I just think we need to be very diligent and deliberate about how we control. I mean, I understand market forces being what they are, and I'd like to believe, and I'm hoping desperately, that the Merck comes in and it provides that kind of infusion into the community. But I don't think that we should rest on our laurels and hope that the market will take care of itself and will correct itself. Because we have decades of neglect. And I just think that we need to be very dutiful and mindful about how we legislate relative to this particular issue. I know how I feel about it. I know what my constituents say, and I know what my convictions are. I just want to make sure that I'm saying that within the context of our discussion, that we need to be very diligent and we need to be making sure that we're looking at both factors and how they affect each other. This thing. So the more times, 9 times out of 10, the dollars, though we might employ people, the profits that come from the variety, small box variety stores don't often stay within the community itself. They go to wherever the headquarters are, versus a local grocer. So though it does provide jobs, I just want to be able to be that voice, and I'm going to have to be that voice to make sure that we're being very dutiful and I can't find the right words that I'm looking for, but deliberate about how we legislate.
Thank you. And to that point, I think that's a valid point that the profits go elsewhere. But I would say that unfortunately is the trend for most of retail. Otherwise, I mean, if that was our primary concern to prevent that, we would not have incentivized Amazon.
So I agree with Commissioner Kane. Everybody mark this down, okay? That we need to take a closer look overall at this. I'm not, at this point, I'm really not for an ordinance. I'm actually for a concerted conversation between all of us on how we really want a policy to look and how we want to follow through on it. And what I mean by a policy, just like when we create a district to improve, you know, how do we want that to look? What kind of restrictions do we want those different areas to have? Because as the mayor was talking about, it's all about what that community wants, and that's what Margia is talking about, the different areas. So we really need to include the neighborhood groups and take it in just like we did when we've worked on some other projects, and we've brought neighborhoods in more in the last 5 years, in my opinion, for them to have a say in how we move forward in our developments in this city than we have for a long time. You know, we actually have listened versus having the meetings after we've decided what to do. And so I appreciate that we've had people come forward beforehand. And so I really do understand where Commissioner Johnson's coming from, because it's very frustrating to watch year after year after year a bunch of mouth or talking, but nothing really happening. And how do you put something into place to move it forward, because it's not easy. So that's just a suggestion that we try to come up with some policies and go that way.
Yep.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'll just throw out a suggestion that it sounds like people are in consensus to continue to look at this a little bit more before maybe we take major action countywide. You know, just an idea to think about in those discussions is we typically in the urban core have hold areas for different things. Sometimes we do that with our land bank. Maybe until we get that grocery store up and running, we draft something for that area where we plan to invest a substantial amount of money to get healthy food to that area, where that area is a hold area for certain types of development until that's up and running, instead of trying to do a broad brush policy across the county. I don't know if that's possible or not, but it's just an idea to talk about later.
Well, I think that was specifically what New Orleans did. There was an overlay district, historic district, right, that was, or Tulsa did? Okay. Yeah, the overlay district.
I would say the one in New Orleans is very large. I mean, their city is many times larger than ours, and it's a fairly significant area. But
But ours
our
could be
scale.
little. Ours could be small. I mean, we can make it whatever size we want to make.
Right.
Well, thank you. I thought that was a very great discussion, and we'll be considering this at the full session. And we want to take a 5-minute break?
Yes.
Yep.
Just a reminder, it is on consent agenda, so if you don't want to approve it like it is, it would need to be set aside.
All right. So let's take a 5-minute break, and at 5 after then, or 6 after, we will begin our presentation on the census count. Again? Uh-oh, he's got his nose in the corner. What did he do wrong? We need a picture of that. Yeah. We were. Yeah. Back in the corner. I didn't see it. I was thinking. All right. So again, now we move on to our next presentation, which is on the Complete Count Committee for Census 2020. And I'd just like to, this is, as Mayor Alan Oregon reached out to us to help us get started and bring to mind that we need to do this. And so we set that in motion, and I want to thank Gordon Criswell for really taking the lead on this. And we'll have we're making great progress on this, and so I think we'll have a great discussion. Mr. Bach, do you want to, any more comments? Gordon.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Would like to introduce Maureen Mahoney. She's co-chair of your Complete Count Census Committee. And so, as you said, we've been charged with working on the 2020 census. So let me start out with just talking about why the census is so vitally important to our community. First of all, it's constitutionally required. Every 10 years, the Constitution requires that we, as Americans, go out and count every household. And we count every household for some of the bullets you see there, for fair representation, fair allocation of federal dollars, and there are a lot of federal dollars to be allocated. One of the key reasons for I think for the census is decision making. We all know that data drives everything, and community surveys, transportation plans, populations without health insurance, and every survey or poll is based on recent data from the U.S. Census. So in addition to being constitutionally required, it gives people at the local level information that they need for good business decisions and good decisions generally about the health of their communities. So the purpose of the Complete Count Committee is to really develop and implement a game plan that we can literally take to the streets with the goal of increasing our census rate, the goal of motivating our community to be educated and understanding about the census, to inform the community about the activities and our timelines, and we have some activities planned in the future for doing just that, and to build community awareness.
One thing I want to add is that starting in March 2019, one can go online for any jobs. There are a number of jobs that are part-time positions for census takers and office positions. So please get the word out to anyone that you know in your districts or your community. One has to apply online, and then the job offers will be made in June. So everyone, this is your window to do that.
And additionally, the census would require that if you apply for a job, particularly in Wyandotte County, that you actually be a resident of our community. It's that job specific. So we have positions, as Maureen said, where we are looking for people who live in our community to apply for these jobs. And as Maureen said, you can go online and do that. So I talked a little bit there about the purpose of the Complete Count Committee. This is the most accurate list of stakeholders or members of our planning committee. If you just kind of peruse the list, we see that we have literally individuals on our planning team from all areas of our community, including business, human services, healthcare, the philanthropic community. That's just how important making sure that everyone in our community gets counted. And that list is actually still growing, by the way. But these are the folk who give direction to Maureen and I on how we can actually accomplish the goal of making sure that all of the households in our community get counted. And as I said, we want to make sure that every household is counted because of representation. This basically relates to our congressional representatives. Actually, I was reading an article this afternoon where the state of Illinois, they lost 2 congressional seats because of census undercounting. And so we certainly don't want that to happen in our state. So having a good count assures that we have equal state and federal representation so that our voices can be heard. The other reason for the count is just federal dollars. I was reading another article today that nationally there's about $900 billion in federal funding that is available, and it's all based on the census count. We know that for every household that's not counted, it represents about $52,000 per household over a 10-year period. So when you do that math, that's quite a big chunk of money that we potentially lose when we don't make sure that every household in our community is counted in April.
We are part of the greater Kansas City area. Mark is pulled together a complete count committee also. So one of the items of information that they've provided is looking at all our different communities and the effect of a 1% undercount in your population for Wyandotte County. Based on 2010, if we undercounted by 1%, we would have lost $4,740,000. We get annually probably 15 million in, so this is real money for us, which is why we need to make sure everyone gets counted.
So in order for us to do that, you saw that big list of all of those people on the committee. We've divided our planning efforts into these sort of 6 sort of big buckets, if you will, trying to make sure we capture everyone in the community. And so for each one of these subcommittees, there is an individual who will essentially chair that particular subcommittee. And their task will be to develop a plan, bring it back to the larger planning committee, and tell us what it's going to require to implement that plan, because they really are the subject matter experts. If you're in healthcare and you are familiar with the safety net clinics, you know what kind of information you need to put together to talk with people who are using the safety net clinics. And so we will have someone who will co-chair that subcommittee, for example, because they really are the subject matter experts, and they can then bring in other people to help them, because the bigger committee, we can't get out and touch everyone. So we really do have to have these subcommittees with subject matter experts really helping us when we get what I call boots on the ground. So these are our 6 committees so far. We think we've covered pretty much the entire county, and so these people will be formulating plans to do that. Did you have something, Maureen? Oh, okay. So for example, we think a lot about education, and these bullets just sort of demonstrate the impact of making sure everyone is counted. Funding for all of our school districts and the Kansas City, Kansas Community College, K-12 education, all of these bullets there are activities in education that are impacted by census and the funding allocations that come from the census count. That's just in education. We talk a lot about neighborhoods, housing, and community development, and we have seen a gradual reduction in our CDBG funding over the years. The census will help bolster that increase in funding. We have a growing senior population in our community that depends on funding for Meals on Wheels, for example. I can recall during this winter, we made sure that our seniors had what I call their senior emergency packs, because the Meals on Wheels people, because of the weather, they were not able to get out. So it's not just studies and surveys. The census impacts lives of real people literally every day. Another example is health and wellness. There are numerous programs in our county health department that are directly impacted by the census and the formula dollars that come through the Kansas Department of Health and Environment and down to our local health departments. You know, we spend a lot of time trying to convince the expansion of Medicaid and Medicare, because we know that if we can keep people out of nursing homes, it's going to cost that family and cost our state a lot less. So the census helps with the allocation of those dollars as well. Economic development, I will note that our business subcommittee is chaired by our Chamber of Commerce president, Mr. Silva. And we know that the Chamber has a subgroup itself that's working on getting the census word out, getting people educated about participating and completing the census. But economic development uses census data to help businesses determine where to locate, where to expand, what sorts of training that employers need to provide to employees. All of that kind of information is generated by what we learn from our census data. This is probably the most telling map. When I first got this assignment, I said to myself, first I went to Mike Grimm, who's our research guru, and I says, Mike, can you do an overlay of me of our neighborhood groups and overlay the census tracts that were undercounted? Because I think when we get ready to do our ground game, getting into the neighborhoods and having them understand the importance of the census is a good place for us to get started. So those heavy blue areas and the numbers represent our neighborhood groups, and the heavy blue areas represent the areas where in the last census 10 years ago there was a significant undercount of households. So strategy-wise, that's one of the places where we will start to do our groundwork, is working with those neighborhood groups to help them get into those neighborhoods where we already know from the last census there was a big undercount. And that's a pretty telling graphic in my opinion. The census will have some challenges. You've all heard about the citizenship question. It's in the courts now. I believe the middle of April there will be oral arguments at the Supreme Court level regarding the citizenship question, and we are hopeful that the court will have made a decision well before April 1 of 2020. Maureen?
The Supreme Court has fast-tracked this, so a federal district court judge made a decision. The Supreme Court took it directly instead of making it work through the circuit. So they, as Gordon pointed out, they're going to have oral arguments in April, and they hope to have a decision by the end of June, because we need to know this. It's a very interesting thing. When one looks at the Constitution, there is no mention anywhere of saying we're counting citizens. We are counting people. So for the first time, this has been raised by the Department of Commerce. So we'll wait to see what happens. Dr. Organ is in the audience. He's pointed out that you don't have to answer that question. You can answer all the others, because it's really about finding out whether someone is in that household or not. So we are pushing forward regardless, depending on what the Supreme Court does, but we just need to know one way or the other in terms of our strategy.
So that's a challenge that's sort of out of our hands, but we do have some other challenges. Our homeless population, the many languages that we have in our community, having to figure out how to craft consistent languages, consistent messages in our community with the 70 some odd different languages and dialects that we have will certainly be a challenge for us. Folks living in shelters, just generally getting the awareness out. Access to technology, I think, will be a biggie as well, particularly with some of our older adults who are not as technology up to speed. Will have some challenges as well. We've had some ideas from the schools about how we might tackle that when we start our ground game. And then the other big challenge will just be distrust of government. What do we do with the data? We have to make sure that the data we collect and the people who are collecting the data and the people that are explaining why the census is important, that we make sure we do a good job of explaining to those individuals that we will not do anything inappropriate or with the data that we collect.
Some of the challenges, as Gordon has mentioned, are people that we would automatically think of, people with limited English, immigrant families. Interestingly, the number of people who've had a child or children in the last 10 years, young children get undercounted because people don't think of adding that. People who rent, people who are persons of color are traditionally undercounted. In terms of the distrust in government, they have actually done these surveys, and it says 54% of us distrust the federal government all or some of the time. And our local government doesn't fare too much better, but a little. 46% of all of us trust our local government all or distrust our local government all or some of the time. So there is this worry about all of a sudden, this is the first year they're asking people to do their surveys online. So you do have this whole group of people that may have a limited access to technology, but you also have our senior citizens who are the ones who religiously fill out their surveys, and we want to make sure that we are all going to be able to work with them, because while the Census Bureau would love people to do this online, everyone will receive a paper survey. Everyone with a U.S. legal postal address will get a paper survey. So you have the chance to do it online. They'll work with our senior citizens. You can actually call in and give your data if you need to, or you can fill out the paper and send it back in.
So sort of back to the next steps, and this is what I've been referring to as our ground game. This will be the real work of the subcommittees to come up with an implementation strategy that will help us get the word out into the communities. And let me go to this next slide because this is really important. We've been fortunate to get a grant from the Wyandotte Health Foundation to support the work of our Complete Count Committee, and we will consult with someone to help each of the subcommittees develop their plan of action. They are the subject matter experts in their particular area. What we want to make sure occurs is there is consistent messaging across the subcommittees so that people don't get confused. And so the consultant that we will be able to acquire through the Wyandotte Health Foundation will be able to help our planning committee with that effort. I just learned yesterday that the Kansas League of Municipalities has also received a grant from the Kansas Health Foundation to help cities and counties with the census effort as well. as soon as I know the criteria that will be necessary, we will be making application to the Kansas League of Municipalities for some funds to do some of the operational ground game things we need to do. Giveaways, posters, this sort of thing, PSAs perhaps. And so the Greater Kansas City foundations are also pitching in, if you will, because we realize that across the region, like Maureen said, this is really, really important to our region. That's why Mark has created this committee on the census to work with all of the municipalities to make sure that we do everything possible to get into every household and get them counted. And last on my slide is, I'd like to leave this up, is April 1 is Census Day. And so come April 1, people will receive their census, their document, and hopefully they will be motivated to fill it out. I think one of the things that we have to do is make sure as a committee that we time our educational efforts in the field far enough out that people remember April 1, but not so far out that people forget about it, because we are inundated now with information. And so that's, our marketing people are going to have to help us figure out how we do that. We don't want to get out too far ahead of the messaging, because people will just become desensitized, and that's the last thing we want. So, Mr. Mayor, that's where your committee is to date. We're working on developing our plans for the ground game, and we will continue to update you as you deem necessary.
Thank you, Gordon. Thank you, Maureen. Also, I'd like to recognize Dr. Organ, if you would please stand. And we appreciate your work in bringing this and continually guiding, helping us move through this process so we can get to a complete count. Thank you, sir.
You know what? Let me just add.
Come on up and sit down. Come on up and sit down. And
the end game for me is that I'm going to retire in this area at some point, and I want to make sure there's enough money to support me as a senior citizen. So whatever it takes, whatever you need, I'm here. And
all right.
I have Michael Cazone, who's our media specialist, with me also, who will be able to help with the PIOs to go ahead and drop things down on the website, or put something on cable TV, or put something in the newspaper to make sure that everybody understands how important this census is. This is the 24th census and probably the most complicated one.
Interesting. Thank you. Commissioner Kane.
Gordon, I'm glad you said that the list is growing, because I think we need somebody from the Turner School District and the Piper School District as well.
Yes, sir. That would be correct.
Commissioner Bynum.
I just wanted to give a quick commercial. Business West is actually hosting a quarterly meeting, May 1 at 8 a.m. at the Country Club Bank Community Room, 110th and Parallel, and Dr. Organ is our speaker, specifically to talk about the census.
Wonderful. And Gordon, I would ask that, because all of us have opportunities to go out to the community, neighborhood groups and so forth, if you could give us just a bullet point, one sheet that we would use as talking points that would actually enable those who may be able to reach out to some of these, groups that are less likely to get counted, and how they would access the help to be able to reach out to them.
We can do that.
Thank you. Commissioner Burrows?
Thank you. Will the committee be bringing forward a budget?
Once we have some idea of what we need to ask for, yes, sir, we will be.
Thank you. And one other question, the $15 million, where does that figure come from?
That's a figure that our CFO has told us, approximately how much comes in to the UG. I got that from Kathleen Bonachin. So I can't break that down for you, but I would be happy to get that for you.
That is just one, when we look at it, the amount of federal funding that we get over the time frame, and a lot of times those criteria are based out on population. So I think that's where she derived that number.
So really the return on investment, the reason why I ask about the budget is the return on investment. If that figure is probably from the census, prior census, and the funding that has come with that. And we have been continually undercounted in our community for decades. And so, as you stated, this is going to be a more complicated census, but a quite challenging census. But if we want a higher return on investment, then that's why I was asking about a budget. I want to make sure that you have the resources necessary to help us get an accurate count, because I believe that is a very underestimated figure.
Well, right now, all the funding that's happening is coming from our nonprofit partners. So right now, the UG hasn't put any money in, but we will let you know. Thank you.
Commissioner Philbrook?
So I think that something else that's underutilized as of yet, but we can definitely put them into action, is the Greater Kansas City Coalition to End Homelessness. They just finished a point-in-time estimation on homelessness in the area, and so they have started working very diligently in Wyandotte County to create more partners, and I know they're working on that. So we need to draw them in to help create an avenue and get people comfortable, our homeless population comfortable with giving us the information so we can count them as well.
And Dr. Organ can maybe speak more to that. They have a very sophisticated plan on how to reach our homeless population and our transient population. So, Doctor, do you want to tell
We're going to do what's called service-based enumeration. So where they go for shelter, where they go for their food. There'll be 3 days in March of 2020 when some of us will be going out with counters, following them where they go. The only ones that will actually know that we're doing this will be the police, so that the census workers don't get arrested.
The other thing is, if you are going out to your neighborhood groups and telling them about the census, no one can access this data. No one can get to it other than the Census Bureau. So one of the things that we also want to caution people is that the census will never send anything to you electronically. So if you get something asking your social security number or any of that, that would not be coming from the census. So somebody would be scamming you, and we need to make sure that our law enforcement is aware of that as well. So just know that.
Commissioner Murguia?
Thank you, Mayor. How are students counted?
Yeah.
It depends where they are. If there's a dormitory and there's over 1,000 students, it'll be a group quarters activity. So we don't actually need their relationship to everybody else that's in the building. We just need body count, because that's what Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution asks for. For KCK, we will work with the administration and Director of Student Life to make sure that students are aware of this and where do they live in apartments around the college. Part of the problem with college students is April 1st, 2020 is right around the time of finals, and those students don't really care about a census. They're going to leave, but if they live in this area for 6 months and a day, they're counted as residents of Kansas City, Kansas.
I'm concerned about that, but I'm more concerned about this very dark blue mark right in front of the University of Kansas Medical Center and Hospital. I know that that is student housing in there. And so I'm very concerned about those students getting counted, because they're living there 9 months out of the year in those apartments for sure, if not longer, if not full time.
Well, we have one member of the subcommittee who's already from KU, and we'll be working with him. And I'm working with some of the other folks at KU, since I'm a graduate from the medical center, to go ahead and make sure that those students are counted.
Okay, and then as Mike said, the list, when I look at the areas that are blue that seem to be the most concerning, there wasn't anyone on the list that I saw, and maybe I overlooked them, from south of the river, other than the person from KU.
We do have someone from your area who's on the committee. She chairs our education subcommittee, Arlene Kramer. And so she's in your area. She's also in the school district, so she's coordinating the education subcommittee. And so Kathleen's role is going to be, what educators, what their schedules are, when you can get with them. And so her task will be work with the schools to see what's the best way to get the information out to students, to parents. One of the examples she had was maybe we set up a booth at football games. And
I get what you're saying about the educational outreach. I mean, just resident representation south of the river. I'm not seeing any of that.
Well, that's something I need to work on.
Okay, thanks.
Well, Senator Petty, other than Senator Petty.
That's true.
2 of those census tracts that are just west of the river, nobody lives there. That's why they're very dark blue. That's where Exide, Certainteed, all the manufacturing plants along Fairfax Trafficway are. So, but they show up when you look at what's called Roam, the reach out. It's an app that will show you what the low response score was for the last census.
Just District 3, though, is in industrial. It's Argentine and Turner and Rosedale.
Okay.
All right. Any more questions or comments? Thank you. We appreciate your efforts. And that concludes this meeting. We're adjourned, and we will reconvene at 7 o'clock in the chambers on the first floor.